My girlfriend in the early 2000s was into sports, but not really a massive cricket fan. But there was one cricketer that she always watched, Ricky Ponting. When asked about why this was the case, she said, just look at him. He just wants to win. He is desperate for it. There's nothing shy about it. Everything about him is about trying to win the very next moment. And the truth was that you didn't really need to know all that much about sport to know about Ponting. It was obvious. In 2017, I said that Virat Kohli was the next Ricky Ponting. There were plenty of cricket reasons why, but for me it was about their batting personality as much as anything else. Both reached for the ball. A lot of great players wait until it is under their eye line. Those two were trying to get out and get at you. They wanted to hit the ball as early as they could. They wanted the bowlers to feel that impact. And of course, when I came up with that comp, it was just a sports writer looking for a comp. But over the years, the more I've watched Kohli, the more I have felt there is a connection between him and Ponting. And when looking at their test records, you can see how kind of eerie this has become. There is not much of a difference between the two lines here. We see batters with a solid start to test cricket, followed by just otherworldly peaks, and then the phase where they were just about par. In fact, it would be hard to tell which line represents who if we didn't label them. And of course, there is another way of looking at how good they were in that prime. Ponting received 942 test batting rating points, the joint fourth highest of all time, while Kohli is way back on only 937, tied at number 11. Captaincy is another thing that they're both remembered for. Kohli led India in 68 matches, winning 40 of them, while Ponting had a win-loss ratio of 3 in his 77 tests. But it was quite clear watching them lead that they just had this desire that other human beings do not. It's not to say that other players don't want to win. Everyone would prefer to win. But some people have to win. That sort of Michael Jordan-esque nature. And Virat Kohli and Ricky Ponting are definitely those kinds of extreme, intense guys. When I think of these two players, there are images that come to my head, like Ponting spitting out blood, or Kohli screaming at the stumps. Both of them on the front foot, even when they're on the back. They are both guys who seem to be on a mission when they are batting. But the question, of course, for this video is, who's had the better test career? South Africa did not choke. In 1906, South Africa needed 284 to win. They had only passed 100 in half their test innings at that point. At 105 for 6, it seemed impossible. They fought back but lost another flurry, leaving 45 to win with 1 wicket in hand. At the crease was Dave Norse, who was a capable batter, and he was joined by Percy Sherwell, the only debutant captain keeper and number 11 in Test cricket history. And these two were doing it. A huge crowd in South Africa cheered on every single run. With 8 left, Sherwell edged between slips for 4. Straight after, Norse ran a 3. England bowled 3 dots. All they needed was 1 wicket to tie. Instead, a leg side full toss, boundary, game over. This was Test cricket's first 1 wicket win, and their last partnership was a record for almost 100 years. But it was also something else. This was the first Test match that South Africa had ever won. Buy my book on Amazon, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. Significant dip in Kohli's Test returns over the last 5 years. He has a match factor of 1.38 for his career. That's really going to upset a lot of people at the moment, but he still has incredible numbers. However, compared to Steve Smith, a batter with a similar sample size in Test cricket, that mark is not like one of the greatest of all time. But despite what the internet is often saying now, it is still clearly the record of a great player. Ponting was 32% better of the top order batters in the matches in which he played, so Kohli is obviously a long way ahead. But we have to consider that the Australian legend has batted with and against more great batters in his career compared to Kohli did. Also, both of them played a significant amount of their games with a great bowling attack, which can often help with match factor, as the opposition's batters are always going to have a lower average. And we see this in the contribution of their total runs as well. Kohli scored 14.6% of India's runs when he played. Ponting is at 13.6. But Ponting batted with the likes of Matthew Hayden, Adam Gilchrist, Justin Langer, Damien Martin, Michael Clarke, Steve Waugh. I mean, we could actually just go on the sort of people that were in his side. While Kohli obviously still had some exceptional batters around him, like Cheteshwar Pujara, Ajigya Rahane, and Rohit Sharma. But it would be fair to say that the Aussie played with a more stacked batting lineup. Despite Kohli playing in the World Test Championship era, which has led to more result-orientated matches, there is not that much difference between him and Ponting when it comes to how often each of them batted in draws. And a big reason behind that, of course, is that Australia's bowling attack was one of the best ever in Ponting's time. And also, the team started to play for results when they were batting. And Ponting's aggression was a big part of that. Unlike a lot of great batters, Ponting didn't actually stand out all that much in draws. He averaged 52 and was only 6% better than the other top batters in those games. On the other hand, Kohli averaged 72 in those matches with a match factor of 1.66. Remember though, he didn't play that many. But in result matches, that's when Ponting gets a boost and he goes back ahead of Kohli. So weirdly enough, even playing in an era when there weren't that many draws, when Kohli did play in them, he was absolutely outstanding. We split Ponting's career into 3 parts. He averaged 10% less than the others till 1998. Then he was, you're going to have to wait for a moment here. Do we have a drum roll? We probably need a drum roll. 70% better for the next 8 years than the other top order batters in his game. But then he was only par for the matches he played in the last 6 years of his career. Till 2015, Kohli actually did quite well in tests, outperforming the others by 18%. Again, we're going to need another drum roll here. He was 94% better than the rest. But in the 2020s, he's again been about par. So we can see that Ponting had a longer peak, but Kohli's was higher. Because we knew that Ponting and Kohli's careers kind of looked very similar to each other, we wanted to see if there was anyone else we could find. The basic shape of this graphic is kind of more or less what you would expect all players to do. Struggle for a little bit when they start, they then get very good during their peak or prime years, and then they dip a little bit at the end. The interesting thing with these guys are they are almost all just players who are great in their prime and ordinary outside of that. We know about all of these players just for the very middle of their career. Ponting has the 4th best average of all time, 75, over 80 consecutive innings. We use that because that is Don Bradman's career. Kohli makes the top 25 on this list as well, with an average of 63, which is still really high. It just doesn't feel as high when you've just heard Ponting's. The Australians' nearest neighbours are Callis and Sobers, while Kohli's are Yunus Khan and Hashim Amla. But it is worth remembering when we're talking about average, that Ponting's peak does almost completely overlap with the greatest ever batting period. So you would expect him to have a high number. Of course, 75 is thoroughly obscene. So when you look at the match factor, Kohli jumps up significantly in this list. Only 6 batters in Test cricket have had a better ratio in their best 80 knocks than Kohli, while Ponting is 9th. So in a relative sense, there really isn't that much between their peaks. The key difference really is that the other top 6 batters averaged 32.5 in Kohli's matches, while it was more than 9 runs higher in Ponting's. Ricky had to outscore people on flat wickets. Virat had to do it on bowling ones. Kohli's peak, by the way, lasted from November 2015 to December of 2020. At home, he averaged almost 80 and scored 10 hundreds, 6 of which were double tons. He averaged over 40 everywhere in the world apart from New Zealand, where he had a terrible series. These included all-time great tours of England and South Africa in 2018, when he played some of his best knock across conditions in this period. For context, the pace-playing pandemic starts to occur in 2017, but it really spreads the following year. So it shows that Kohli was making runs when no one else was, at a rate that few have ever in history. Ponting's best 80 inning stretch was from April 2003 until December 2006. That was a great time to bat. And at home, he almost averaged 90 during this period, and he was still averaging 60 away. It was under 40 in England, or that included the surprise 2005 Ashes that he lost, and 33 in Sri Lanka. But he was above 90 in New Zealand and Bangladesh, and more than 100 in the West Indies. He also averaged 58 in South Africa. But remember, when we were looking at their prime before, we were just looking at the best 80 innings they ever played in one period. These guys at their peak went well beyond that. Ponting had, we might need the drum roll again here, 191 innings where he averaged more than 60, the 3rd highest ever. Again, Kohli is in the top 25 of this stat as well. And when we look at stretches where they were 75% better than the batters in their game, they're both in the top 10 all time with more than 100 such innings. Both of their cases for greatness are from their peaks, and few have ever climbed this high. When the other top 6 batters average below 35, Ponting is 81% better. Kohli is still great, but he's 53%. But in high-scoring innings, Ponting's ratio drops to only 11% better. Perhaps that's because he had so many other players cashing in with hundreds, while Kohli's is still strong at 27%. But as you might expect from their eras, 60% of Kohli's innings were in low-scoring games. For Ponting, it was less than 40%. But that is when Ricky was at his absolute best, on tough pitches. It's just that Kohli faced those conditions a lot more than him. Ponting did better against the quicks outside of Asia, averaging almost 50. Because of just how much he loved the extra pace and bounce. He was one of the last players not to wear a helmet when facing quicks. Few, if any, played the very fast ball, and specifically the very fast short ball, as well as he did. His record at home and in South Africa definitely backs up that claim. Fast bowling in Asia is obviously not an issue for Kohli, but he averages 36 in conditions that are generally more favourable for the pace bowlers, which is low, but not jaw-dropping for a batter who has played a lot in the wobble ball era. We know with Kohli he's better against high pace and bounce as compared to swing and sideways movement. So the more sideways movement that came in was really testing to him. It probably would have tested Ponting as well, because they both go at the ball so strongly. But Kohli has one of the best records by an Asian batter in both Australia and South Africa, despite the poor series he just had. And his struggles against the moving ball in England probably have their own 8-part series on Netflix. Harbhajan Singh has played a huge role in how people remember Ricky Ponting against the turning ball. But the truth is, despite his struggles in India, he averages almost 45 versus spin in Asia. Kohli is up at 49, which isn't at the level of some of the great Indian players over the years, but a lot of that has taken a hit in the last 4 or so years when the wickets have started to rag sideways. Something that might have also hastened his decline. Like Ponting never had to worry about not making runs in Australia. Those wickets were always perfectly set up for him. And of course, when you bat in Test cricket makes a huge difference. Ponting's median entry point is about 7 overs earlier than Kohli, which is a plus point in his favour. The higher up you bat, the harder it is. And when the Aussie came in before the 10th over, he averaged a spectacular 59. That was higher than his normal record. Kohli, despite playing some of his best Test innings after coming in early, still only averages 37 when he comes in before the 20th over, and his mark goes up to 56 after that. So that's the when, now you need the where. Ponting outperformed the others by 41% at home. There's so many great Australian batters with a really high average, and a lot of it comes from their own wickets. But he was also 25% better than other top order batters in South Africa, the West Indies, Sri Lanka, and New Zealand. He still did well in Pakistan, UAE, and Bangladesh as well. But most of his innings away from home were in England and India, where he averaged 34 and 25 respectively. He was still 18% better than the batters in those games in England, but he was 39% worse when he was in India. Kohli's match factor has him as 59% better in India. In fact, it is greater than 1 in every country except for Bangladesh, and he's only played 5 innings there. It's above 25% in Australia, South Africa, and the West Indies. In 18 innings in South Africa, he averages 69% better than everyone else. He has a fine record in Sri Lanka and New Zealand, though not awe-inspiring, and he is basically par in England, which is probably not how most people will think of him. What we really want to do is compare each of these batters in the places they just went, like neither of them really played all that much in Bangladesh. So Ponting is better in England, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, the West Indies, while Kohli is superior in South Africa. Another way of comparing their relative performances is by looking at the percentage of their team's runs. On this metric, Ponting is ahead in 3 countries and Kohli in 2. And you'll notice that we didn't include India or Australia on the last graphics. That is because of the vastly different sample sizes there. But if we look at Ponting in India and Australia, he made 14.4% of his runs at home, and he just has a spectacular record there. To Ponting in Australia, there really wasn't a length you could bowl to him. But when he went to India, he made less than 10% of Australia's runs. And it really is the one big blip in what is otherwise a stellar career. Kohli's contribution in Australia was well above 17%. Which means that despite not performing in the recent series, his body of work more than holds up there. He's definitely one of the best visiting batters in the country in the last 50 years. I think Damien Fleming might have made a video about that on his YouTube. At home, he played with batters like Pujara and Rohit, who were just incredible against spin, and yet he still contributed over 15% of the runs there. I think it says a lot that he was better in Australia than India. Ponting still has the most Test runs of any batter from the age of 28 to 32, combined with the highest average, drum roll again, 70.8 of all the top 50 run getters in this age group. He also stacked up 19 centuries in that period, scoring a ton less than every 5 innings. Kohli also makes the top 10, averaging only 56.9. We mention this because these are two peak players, and that's generally the age at which people actually peak. That's not quite the case for Virat Kohli, though. His prime years are 26 to 30. His decline actually starts at 31. He did have another great year when he was 34, but of course he's been below par since. Ponting was consistently great from 34 to 31, apart from a single year, and that year he just got Harbhajan Singh'd. But his numbers really start to drop once he turns 32. The highest match factor Ponting had in 10 consecutive tests was 248, so 148% better than the batters he was in a game with. It's a pretty good number. But Kohli's best 10-match period was actually, again, another drum roll, 194% better than everyone else. That came when he scored big versus Sri Lanka at home, followed by brilliant tours of South Africa and England in low-scoring matches. But of course, in his last 10 tests, he's averaged 23% less than the other top 6 batters, which is, you're not going to be shocked here, the worst phase of his career. Ponting has admitted that he played on too long. He said it wasn't for selfish reasons, but he believed that the presence of a senior figure like him helped the younger cricketers. I'm not sure how much I agree with that because Simon Kadich and Mike Hussey were also around. For the ICC, he talked about Kohli trying too hard after his poor run in the Border Gavaskar Trophy, and Ponting compared it with his own struggles. And I think there's a real issue with players like this who've just had ridiculous peaks. It's so hard for them to think they'll never get back there because for like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, they were probably either the best batter in the world or in that conversation every single time. That's how they see themselves. So of course they're going to continue to chase it, but sometimes when it's gone, it's gone. The last 10 tests where Kohli has scored less than 400 runs, he has really been the worst of his career. If he calls it a day right now without turning that around, he might be remembered as a worse player than he actually is. And as we speak, the rest of the batters in the Fab Four look set to finish with an average of above 50. Kohli might not even make it to 10,000 runs either. 5 years ago, he looked set for both of those marks easy. So who is the greater test batter? Right now, in the gloom of Virat Kohli's endless malaise, you would have to be brave to choose him over Ponting. But that is because Ponting's own slide is now far enough away that we only remember the pull shots. So maybe the same thing will happen with Virat one day. It's not going to happen right now, though. I think Ricky Ponting wins the longevity argument. He had 11 plus years, with 7 of them being great. He scored the second most runs in Test match cricket. Kohli has had as many years of greatness, but only 9 plus years overall. And Ponting's peak was also more prolonged, and you could also make the case that it was also better than Virat Kohli's, or at the very least on par. They're both quite solid across the conditions, but Ponting gives you greatness in more countries on the road. Kohli's main skill when traveling is his incredible consistency. Like there's no country where he has a serious dip, where obviously Ponting has India. But it's also worth remembering that Ponting bats at number 3 and therefore has to face the new ball more. And not only that, he did it in the old-fashioned way of being the kind of player who would come in and stamp his front foot on the throat of a game. As a bowling team, you celebrate your first wicket, and out comes punter in a mood to dominate. And of course, on top of that, when both men did actually bat early, Kohli wasn't ever at Ponting's level, because few people ever have been. The current internet discussion about how Virat Kohli is no longer still a great batter for his entire career because of the recent slump is obviously a little mad. He cemented himself before the slump. But this has been rough. Even if you move the recency bias to the side, I still think Ponting is a tier up on Kohli. Both are greats, but I think Ponting is slightly greater. These are 2 of my favorite batters ever. It feels like choosing between pizza and cheeseburgers, picking one over the other. In a perfect world, can't we have both? They were both fierce in an obsessive way. Ponting changed his career after getting punched in a pub, and Kohli cut out every ingredient that Mumblog said were bad for him just so he could make more runs. Ponting on the pull, Kohli through covers. Those shots were worth the ticket price alone. But the best thing about both of these guys was how they batted like only winning mattered. It took God and the demon to build international cricket, but don't tell Johnny Best that. 1882, Australia had played 1 test in England against the god W.G. Grace, and they sucked. So they were playing him again, and it was a tough wicket. But England was in front, so Australia was desperate for a 3rd innings lead. At number 8 was young all-rounder Sammy Jones. After a routine single, he walks down to do some gardening on the pitch. Grace whips off the bails and appeals. The ball wasn't dead, Jones was run out. The Australians were furious. In fact, some of the English players were also furious. But what Grace said went, and the umpires had already given it. Next in was Fred Spofforth. He was known as the demon fast bowler. He was furious and he let England know exactly what was coming next, which was maiden. There's 12 maidens. I can't count them all. England only needed 85 to win. W.G. Grace made 32. England only 77. That was the test where the Ashes began. Buy my book, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire, on Amazon today.